Okay, imagine this. A world where the financial rule book, the one everyone trusts, is just spectacularly wrong. And almost no one even sees it.
It's a wild thought, isn't it?
Totally. And today we're really digging into that period just before the 2008 crash. How did like a handful of people see this massive collapse coming when pretty much everyone else was caught completely off guard?
Yeah, and to help us unpack this, we've been using Mindful Moments. It's this AI tool for analyzing books, and it's honestly great for pulling out the core ideas and getting you to think critically.
Exactly. You shared the source materials, wanting to get the essence without drowning in jargon, and that's our goal here. We want to understand the mindsets, the weird incentives, and all those surprising details that led to, well, one of the biggest financial meltdowns ever.
Our focus is definitely on those crucial years leading up to '08, and specifically we're looking at it through the eyes of the people who bet against the prevailing Wall Street wisdom.
Right. What made them tick? What barriers did they hit? And what systemic problems did they actually uncover?
And the main lens we're using, as you mentioned, is Michael Lewis's The Big Short. It gives such a, well, compelling narrative of these events and the key characters involved.
So let's talk about these contrarian thinkers. First up, Steve Eisman. He started by looking at subprime lenders, right?
Yeah, early on. And he had this pretty disturbing realization. He figured out Wall Street didn't really care what it sold, just how much it could sell. Quality wasn't the point.
That's unsettling.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
And Eisman himself was quite a character. His own mother said he had these two sides, one super generous, the other intensely analytical. Apparently, he used to study the Talmud just to find inconsistencies.
Wow. Okay.
And something deeply personal shaped him, too. The tragic loss of his young son, Max. It gave him this profound sense that, quote, anything can happen to anyone at any time. Really impacted his view on risk.
I can only imagine.
He even had this sort of unconventional therapy group he just called his work group. And the team he built, Vinny, Porter Collins, Danny Moses, they all shared his, let's say, deep skepticism about how finance worked.
Okay, so that's Eisman. Then there's Michael Burry.
A bit different, right?
Very different. He had a physical difference, only one eye, which seemed to influence how he interacted with the world, maybe made him more of an outsider looking in. And his investment philosophy was unusual, too.
How so?
He basically said intelligent investing is the opposite of a popularity contest. It wasn't about following the crowd. He was all about digging into the numbers, the financial statements. Use tools like 10K Wizard to find value others missed.
Sounds meticulous.
Extremely. Even his fee structure for his fund, Cyan Capital, was odd. He only charged investors his actual expenses. So his interests were, directly lined up with theirs. No fat management fees regardless of performance.
And did it work?
Oh, yeah. He consistently beat the S&P 500. And his big insight, the one relevant here, was seeing the subprime mortgage bond train wreck coming. It was actually sparked by noticing how JP Morgan created corporate credit default swaps.
Ah, so he saw a tool he could use.
Exactly. He realized, hey, I can use the same idea, these swaps, to bet against these dodgy mortgage bonds. Okay, and there was another group, Cornwall Capital.
Right, Cornwall Capital.
Yeah.
That was Charlie Ledley, Ben Hockett, and Jamie Mai. Their whole philosophy was built around betting on things Wall Street considered super unlikely, the long shots.
So naturally drawn to this kind of contrarian bet.
Well, initially they were actually pretty confused when Greg Lippmann from Deutsche Bank pitched the idea of shorting subprime. They didn't really know mortgage bonds.
So how did they get involved?
They understood credit default swaps. They saw them basically as financial options, a way to make a leveraged bet on something failing. That clicked for them.
Okay, so we have these different players all sensing a weakness. What exactly was the weakness? This involves those CDOs, right? Mezzanine CDOs and synthetics.
Precisely. It starts pretty simply with subprime mortgage bonds. These are just bundles of mortgages given to people with, frankly, poor credit history, risky loans. These bundles were then sliced into different layers called tranches. Think of it like risk levels. You had the safest AAA tranche at the top, going down through AAA, BBB, and so on, getting progressively riskier.
So BBB was the riskiest part of that initial bond.
Right. But then came the next step. They took those riskiest BBB-rated slices, the stuff already considered quite dodgy, and repackaged them into new bonds. These were the collateralized debt obligations, or CDOs.
Wait, so they bundled the risky stuff together?
Exactly. And here's the kicker. The rating agencies, the ones supposed to assess risk, often gave these new CDOs incredibly high ratings. Sometimes, like 80% of a CDO made entirely of BBB junk was rated AAA.
That seems Fundamentally flawed. It's like taking rotten apples, mushing them up, and calling 80% of the resulting mush premium grade.
That's a pretty good analogy, actually. But it got even crazier. Then came the synthetic CDOs.
Synthetic, meaning not real.
Well, not backed by actual mortgages anymore. These synthetics were made up entirely of credit default swaps, basically insurance policies written on those BBB-rated slices of the original subprime bonds, or even on the BBB tranches of other CDOs.
My head's starting to spin a bit.
You're not alone. Eisman famously called these synthetic CDOs the engine of doom.
Okay, engine of doom. That paints a picture. Was there someone driving this engine?
Sort of. There were seedier managers like a guy named Wing Chow. His job was essentially to create demand for the riskiest slices of these subprime deals, because that's how he got paid.
Yeah.
He had almost no personal risk in it.
Wow.
There's this incredible conversation Eisman had with him where Chow basically says, I love guys like you who short my market. Without you, I don't have anything to buy. It just shows how warped the incentives were.
So the short sellers were actually helping create the stuff they were getting against.
In a way, yes. And the crucial thing about synthetics was they removed any physical limit. You didn't need actual bad loans anymore to make these bets. You just needed someone willing to sell you the insurance, the CDS. The potential scale of the risk just exploded.
This sounds like a house of cards built on, well, nothing solid. What allowed it to get so big? What were the basic flaws?
A huge one was the originate and sell model. Lenders made loans, often really bad ones, because they knew they wouldn't hold the risk. They'd just package them up and sell them off almost immediately.
Passing the buck, basically.
Pretty much. And the gatekeepers, the rating agencies, they were supposed to be the independent judges of risk.
Yeah, what happened there?
Well, they relied heavily on the models given to them by the banks creating these things. And those models were built on shaky assumptions, like, house prices will always go up forever.
Which seems obviously flawed in hindsight.
Absolutely. And the assumption that loan losses in these diverse pools wouldn't be correlated, that defaults in Florida wouldn't track defaults in California. Eisman had this moment in Las Vegas at a conference where he realized the rating agencies they didn't care. That was his word. They were under immense pressure from the industry to just rubber stamp these deals with high ratings.
So originate and sell. Flawed ratings. What else? Were people just blind?
It certainly looks that way sometimes. You had people like Howie Hubler at Morgan Stanley who apparently genuinely believed his massive $16 billion bet on subprime stuff was somehow risk-free.
$16 billion, risk-free.
Baffling. There's this intense focus everywhere on tiny details like fractions of percentage points, basis points, while ignoring the enormous underlying danger. Yeah. And look at AIG, specifically AIG Financial Products run by Joe Cassano. They sold a ton of credit default swaps ensuring this stuff. The culture there actively shut down anyone who questioned the risk models. Obedience over skepticism.
Were there clear warning signs that people just missed or ignored?
Oh, absolutely. There were several flashing red lights. Meredith Whitney, an analyst, came out publicly and predicted major trouble for Citigroup because of their exposure. That got attention, but maybe not enough action.
Any others?
Yeah, at that same Las Vegas subprime conference Eisman attended, another guy, John Devaney, who ran a hedge fund, apparently went on this rant. He called the securities worthless and basically called the rating agencies whores. Pretty blunt.
You'd think that would raise some eyebrows.
You would. Also, there was this rush to create even more subprime bonds right before Standard & Poor's was due to implement a slightly stricter rating model. People were trying to push deals through under the old easier rules.
That sounds suspicious.
And then, in early 2007, the market initially stumbled, but then it seemed to recover. It baffled the guys like Burry and Eisman who knew the fundamentals were rotten. That temporary stabilization probably gave a false sense of security to many.
Okay, so against this backdrop of, let's call it denial and flawed systems, our contrarians are making their moves. How exactly did they bet against this?
Well, Michael Burry, he basically had to persuade Wall Street banks like Goldman Sachs and Deutsche Bank to create credit default swaps, specifically for him, targeting particular subprime mortgage bonds he thought were the worst.
They just made them for him.
Initially, they were hesitant. Like, why would you want to bet against mortgages? Housing is solid. But then pretty quickly, they realized they could make money selling this insurance and maybe even package those bets into other things. Suddenly, they were eager to sell them to him, and later, eager to buy them back when things got dicey.
Okay. And Greg Lippmann at Deutsche Bank.
Lippmann was actively, aggressively trying to get Deutsche Bank itself and its clients to short the subprime market. He had this presentation, famously involving his analyst nicknamed the Great Chinese Quant, Eugene Zhu, trying to convince people with data.
Did it work?
He faced a lot of internal resistance. He even apparently tried to convince AIG to stop selling the credit default swaps, basically saying you guys are taking on way too much risk here. But they didn't listen.
And Cornwall Capital, the long shot guys.
Their angle was slightly different but clever. They decided to buy credit default swaps, not on the WOOS BBB stuff directly, but on the tranche just above it, the AAA tranche of the CDOs.
Why AA? That sounds safer.
That was their point. They reasoned, if the BBB stuff underneath is junk, how can you possibly package it up and have the layer right above it, a AA layer, be genuinely safe? They saw the rating itself as fundamentally flawed logic. Their trip to that Vegas conference was also key. They met people like David Burt and Stacy Strauss, who helped them navigate actually buying these swaps.
It really sounds like the clock was ticking down. What were the moments when things really started to unravel?
A big one was the collapse of two Bear Stearns hedge funds in mid-2007. They were heavily invested in this stuff, and they just imploded. That sent serious shockwaves.
A real sign the cracks were showing.
Definitely. For Michael Burry, things got really tense with his own investors. He had to side pocket his CDS positions, basically lock them up so investors couldn't force him to sell early, which led to some very difficult emails and calls. He was sure he was right, but his investors were getting nervous.
And the actual mortgages themselves.
That was the final nail. Remember those teaser rates? Low introductory rates on subprime mortgages. They started resetting to much higher rates. Suddenly, borrowers couldn't afford their payments. Defaults surged. There's a specific bond pool often cited, OMLT 2005-3, where defaults just went through the roof. The underlying loans were failing, plain and simple.
And reflecting on all this, using the kind of critical thinking that tools like mindful moments in our discussions aim to foster, it really hammers home how crucial it is to question assumptions, right?
Absolutely. Especially when things seem overly complex or when everyone seems to agree. That's often when the biggest risks are hiding. You have to look beyond the surface narrative.
It's just a stark reminder of how fast things can fall apart when the foundation is weak.
And the systemic failures were profound. People genuinely didn't seem to understand what was inside these complex CDOs. As Jim Grant, a financial writer, put it, the rating agencies weren't doing analysis. They were performing alchemy, turning lead into gold.
They also massively underestimated correlation, didn't they? The idea that all these loans across the country could go bad at the same time.
Exactly. The models assumed diversification would protect them, but when the housing market turned nationwide, that diversification vanished. Everything was correlated.
So thinking about it now, it's kind of scary how easily huge systems can be built on really shaky logic.
It really is. And how hard it is to see those flaws when incentives are pointing everyone in the wrong direction towards taking more risk, not less. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the potential equivalents today? What massive risks might we be collectively overlooking right now because the incentives or the conventional wisdom are blinding us?
That's a really sobering thought to end on. If this exploration into the run-up to the financial crisis got you thinking, we definitely encourage you to subscribe for more analyses like this.
And please share this discussion with anyone you think might find it interesting or thought-provoking.
For sure. And if you want to dive deeper into the main source we discussed, Michael Lewis's book, we'll put a link to purchase The Big Short in our show notes.
But most importantly, just keep thinking critically. Question the information you come across. Don't be afraid to challenge the narratives everyone else seems to accept.
Well said.